So this is the end, non-duality, the end of life as a person. It's the end of all identity. It's a seeing of nothing and everything. And the nothing is the emptiness of this, the absolute emptiness of all phenomenon, people, chairs, lights, walls. And yet at the same time, all this phenomenon is appearing. And it's appearing for no one. And the heart of the seeing is love. A love that dissolves that sense of lack, that sense of searching, the desire to add something to my life, to improve, to change. It's the absolute fulfillment of all desire in, say, a moment, but there is no moment, it's the timeless. So identity falls away from the time-based entity, and time is thought, which is always concerned with the past to the future. It cannot touch what is, and it's not who you are, and that is seen. And it's seen directly, it is seen, it can be seen visually, it is also known. So it's experienced as well. There is no experiencer, but it's experienced as an absence of the physical, an absence of the thinker. So just life appearing for no one. So in a sense you could say that nothing happened, nothing ever happened, nothing ever will happen, and yet life continues for no one. But anything we say about this, of course, is bullshit. We were trying to apply concepts to this, and it is beyond the mind, which is impossible to comprehend. And very often there's a honeymoon period after this, where the desire is just to sit, just to be with what is. It's as if you're using your senses for the first time, you're seeing everything for the first time. So everything is incredibly fresh, everything's incredibly absorbing. All the energy that went into the me, into the mind and into the body is just released into the environment, so you're seeing. And very often your perception is amplified, and so beauty is seen, beauty is stillness. And stillness is visible, and that's the sacred. And it's not something that could be apprehended, because you may read about the sacred, you may read all these books, but when you see it, you know it, whether you believed it before or not, you know that that is something that is, in a sense, you've always known it, because there is nothing or no one separate from this. So the perception of inside and outside collapses. There's just oneness. There's nothing in here, there's nothing out there, just what's arising. And yet, at the same time, the connection is felt between the apparent person here and all that's arising. So there's a kind of causeless joy or in loveness with everything, including objects, people, particularly people. And there's a kind of seeing almost beyond the personality, so there's a kind of joy in just meeting in this kind of energy, which is, you may call it beingness, whatever you want to call it. So whatever you're with someone or talking, there's this stillness is there. It's just there in the background or in the foreground, but it's always there, and this conversation can arise and connection. And of course, we have always known this. We were born into this. And some people remember that, apparent people, when they awake to this. So maybe the spontaneity of childhood. And the stillness, the absence of thought. Hi. Sorry. No worries. And it's very natural, it's extraordinarily natural, which is the kind of shock, which isn't a shock about this, is that in the seeing of this, it's just like the old life drops away and suddenly there's just peace. And there's, for some people, the mind is annihilated in this and it stays in abeyance, which is very, very sweet. And other people, it's background. So in a sense, stories can be accessed, and time appears in the timeless. And for very few, the psychology is just totally gone, in which case they're probably more likely to be sat by the side of a road somewhere, staring into space. But very often it is seen in two stages, if you like, or else there's a very gradual sliding into this, or what some people call meaning and being. So there's very often the first sort of event would be the seeing of emptiness, which tends to dissolve desire. So they can be going through life without much attachment to it. And that can be quite difficult, because motivation can fall away in that, and maybe the love of drama, intrigue, all these things can just fall away because you're relating differently, seeing from a different perspective, it's not off the mind, and all these things are seen through. So it can be a difficult period. It's what St. John Cross called the dark night of the soul. So it can be like the desert. Of course, there's no guarantee that love can be seen, and unconditional love is a radical acceptance of everything and everyone as they are, how they are. There's no argument with life. It's just accepting life as it is. And within that, of course, thoughts can arise that argue with the life, but suffering can arise. It tends not to stick around very long, and very often after the period of the honeymoon period, kind of things become more normal. This becomes, just your way of living. Though it's not anybody's way of living, there may be a desire to change your life or whatever, and for some people that can be quite difficult as well. Some people will flow, and some people will find difficulty with that. And so it's not necessarily always easy, and some people find it hard to adapt as well, particularly initially. There can be problems with language and relating, because there can be often a desire just to be alone, or just to be in the stillness. So because this is beyond language, it's beyond. So you may find spiritual searching has stopped, the books are boring, although boredom doesn't arise anymore in the same way, because the sting out of time is gone, so it's not experienced in the same way. It's people arise and they go, and there tends to be not much of a trace, sometimes no trace of that, so it's very much, the energy is very much with what's happening, whereas before it was very much the future and the past and anxiety. And sometimes we get a sense of this when we meditate, and the mind calms down, maybe peace. We all know what peace is. Well, most of us have some sort of sense of peace. But this is quite a deep peace. And when we go on holidays or something shocks us sometimes into stillness, so our moments between thoughts maybe, but this depends on no object. So when it's seen, when it's an abiding state, it doesn't matter where you are. It can be in the middle of traffic, it can be sitting in nature or in the motorway or right in the heart of the city. The stillness is seen everywhere. I might stop there, I don't know. Has anybody got any questions? Hi.
Hi. Did you try to, did it happen to you by chance, or I mean, I don't know your story, so I hope it's okay.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, there wasn't. I'd only just come across.
Excuse me?
I'd only just come across this message, so there was no. I wasn't a spiritual seeker.
Okay.
The story was of suffering, so it was intense suffering, and there was a surrender, which was obviously no one here surrendered, but. It felt like it was kind of going in that direction, and suddenly it just opened up. So it was a kind of stepping into that, like it was just, when it happened, it was just like in another life now. There was kind of no sense of looking back. It really was no backward glances. It was just, this is what's happening, because you're in what's happening now, so it was just annihilated the past. I mean, not saying that, no, I mean, there's one or two memories, I've still got an energy to them, but most of it, the energy tends to go out of the past, except where there's trauma, or, some people have one or two or whatever, that can still bring up emotion. So, and that seems to be the typical before story. Well, mind you, so many people have that story anyway, whether awakening is there or not, but very intense. I think depression, grief, shock, these are things associated with it. Glimpses, also like, I think Steve Taylor's kind of also studied like failed suicide attempts. Very often there'd be a glimpse in that, or I'm not recommending that, please don't, you know, not guaranteed. But yeah, so it's as if the ego can't cling on anymore. It just, I can't deal with this, and something else takes over. But that's a story, you know. But yeah, so I didn't know, and I had to piece the pieces together afterwards, because I didn't realise that there was awakening to emptiness probably about a year before. So there was this desert period, but it was only really when I kind of read more I realised that's what happened, because there was this. If you've never read any of these books, it's interesting, because I knew that this was gone, and I thought, well, must be madness. But I thought, well, madness doesn't involve the sense of there's no physical self here, and I didn't really understand that. So there's no physical self, and there was this equilibrium that just didn't seemed healthy. But all you've got in psychological books is, you know, that's dissociation, that's you know, derealization or something like that. So sometimes it takes a while to kind of figure out what's happened. You know, and some people don't really like to talk about it afterwards either. They're not, you know, because doubt can continue as well, no matter what the intensity of the awakening is, which is interesting as well. So it's just, I think those are the kind of patterns I went before. So if you really were quite a doormat, say, or people pleaser, you might feel unentitled to talk about being awake, because you might see it as a boast or something you shouldn't say about. And then of course it's beyond boasting or not boasting, and it's quite common now as well. So a lot of people have had glimpses now. I'm not sure what the statistics are, but it's quite common. Well, what about you?
I'm trying to have.
Oh right, okay.
I'm
You're looking for that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're reading all the books and watching all the YouTubes.
Yeah, and sitting. Daily. Trying to have it on Smitten.
Oh right, okay.
I mean, well, the only third person that I meet that actually went to awakening.
Okay. Well, a lot of people do find the meetings that they drop in that, so it can often be there's sort of just watching and listening and nothing else, and then once you leave, everything comes back again. I think because there's not really an agenda present, it's almost like it mimics the awakened state. Things that mimic that, like where there's no agenda, where there's nothing to be done, it's almost like it deepens in that. That's my experience. It deepens in those situations. So, I mean, I can still sit, when I used to go to a meeting and sit at the back, or could still really drop in this, you know what I mean? Because there's the absorption, the levels of absorption can increase or decrease. So, you know, so it can feel very drunken at times. It can feel very, very kind of, you know, absorbed in very like emerging kind of with what is, and sometimes it's a bit more kind of ordinary. But the sense of inside outside never comes back, or the me doesn't come, you know, that doesn't return when it's like that. But yeah, so the difference is, I think when people suffer and they sense this constriction, or, you know, it's more like the glimpses that some people have quite a lot of those before it kind of, if they're lucky, it just all collapses. But.
question. So you talked about when the sense of self dissolved, there was a letting go of desire. What I want to ask is, when the desire went, did also the phenomena of resistance go? Like, do you experience resistance anymore, or is everything just flowing?
Resistance. There can be resistance and non-resistance at the same time. Like, so there may be the action of that, but it's within an acceptance. You know, so something may be not okay, and you just be like, you know, piss off or whatever. In a way, you could call that resistance. I don't know, but there's a real acceptance of that too. So they're not contradictory, because it's just.
Yeah. So even when you set a boundary, that just happens itself. Okay.
Well, boundaries. This does not make boundaries occur. So if you have weak boundaries beforehand, you may well have weak boundaries afterwards. You may not if you see that, but if you don't. It's like if you don't really know you have weak boundaries, which some people don't because they're in denial or it's all repressed, then you have to build those, and some people find that tough because that's a different matter. So, and also in a way it can make you more open and vulnerable because you're just so open to what's appearing, and there's this joy and you want to connect with people, you know, anyone, strangers, there's a love of the connection, which at first is just, you know, and it seems like everybody's smiling at what they do. You see, a lot of people do seem to smile, like. So in a way, it can make things worse initially if you don't have those boundaries, and you can feel really helpless in the face of that. So I think where boundaries are concerned, that's very much the codependent thing, not being able to say no. So that's the one where you need to get in touch with your anger, even if it's not a real kind of aggressive anger or just a sense of a no, because that can just be felt, and real strong no can just be felt viscerally anyway. So it's not necessarily, unless you're a rageaholic, in which case after awakening there will be rage. You know, it doesn't negate that, you know, because it depends on the psychology. So someone can be unable to say no, but if you're a kind of pathological narcissist or something, then that's kind of what you are, because it's characterological. It's the personality. The personality's like that, and the personality doesn't shift because that's a constant over time. So anyway. But yeah, I mean, resistance tends to go to a huge extent, so there is very often non-reaction, I would say, and there's that space to see what arises as well. So there's, I don't know, it can diffuse things very easily as well. So if you're kind of relatively healthy, just normally neurotic, and there's awakening, there probably is going to be a falling away of a lot of resistance, because all those defenses aren't necessary. The intellectual defense, I am very clever, I am this, you know, that's not necessary. It's okay to be wrong, not know, vulnerable. You're much more in touch with your vulnerability, because that's kind of beautiful. And it is a strength anyway, being vulnerable, because every defense is a defense against that, and that's your true nature, is this kind of openness.
I guess also when the fear of death goes, I assume that went for you as well. That must free. It must be very kind of relieving to have that fear gone.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd recognise it as gone until maybe somebody mentioned it, but yeah, and I find that kind of baffling as well, because it does have a really strong hold, and it does. I mean, I think in the moment or approaching that, or if there was like real serious illness, and I think there could be a lot of fear around that, because the process of dying can be pretty scary or whatever. Who knows what can arise then? But like the idea of it's lost its sting somehow. So yeah, because I guess, you know, there's not living in the future, not living in the past. It's here, you know. It's, you know, and there's nothing to be lost in a sense. But I don't necessarily believe in death. I don't really think there is death. But I suppose I kind of did more then initially. So you can change how you look at this as well. But that's nothing to do with awakeness or awakening. That's just, you know, that's something else. That's other phenomenon.
Can I elaborate on that, on my experience about that, the shift around the fear of death?
Yeah.
What changed for me, and actually it really did instantly become apparent that my fear of death had shifted, because it was kind of revealed that that fear of death had just been, like, for example, if somebody said to me, oh, you're going to die next week or in a month or something, before that point my reaction would have been, oh no, not yet.
Yeah.
Right, there's something still, you know, it's too soon, there's something more still to be had. And upon this shift, it became clear that that thing that would have been my, you know, my reservation about death was no longer true. You know, that the fear of death had been fear of maybe not having lived enough or fully, but actually, really, truly, what I realised was the fear of death had been about this actually.
Yeah.
Now it's okay. There was something in me that you know, there was just some unspecified missing peace or you know, satisfaction that came from something, and actually that shift, that coming to knowing, you know, that part of myself. But just when the picture was revealed, suddenly it was like, oh, okay, you know, the credits can roll.
Yeah, okay. I love that. It's interesting though, you know, for someone who hasn't had awakening though, the living life to the full tends to, well, I'm thinking of Irvin Yalom, who wrote about this, tends to assuage the fear of death, in a sense. Anyway, it's because I think in my own story, there was something nice about feeling like I had lived.
Yeah.
There is something psychological that shifts. Okay, not the seeing of like the story, and it doesn't matter. This is completion anyway. You don't need to complete the story or whatever. It's any time is the right time or something like that. But yeah.
But all those things that living fully might have looked like to me, you know, go and do this or go over there and do that, you know, live life on the edge and be dangerous and whatever, was never quite it either.
Yeah.
You know, there was something about this shift of everything.
Oh yeah, definitely. I get that. The one thing I would say about people who have done that, live dangerously, is that if they've come through that and they've had an awakening, my tendency is to trust them a hell of a lot more than the people who haven't, because they're so in touch with the dark side of themselves and what they're capable of. And I don't think anything, I think you can work stuff out in like group work and psychotherapy and stuff like that, but there's something about that, you know, from the people I've met, people I'm friends with, so it is a different, it's lovely to see somebody who's come through that, because there's a real lack of judgment, you know, that this is beyond judgment, and then, you know, you meet somebody and everybody's got their kind of judgment around whatever, but they seem to be very beyond the kind of common morality stuff and seeing the bigger picture. Well, you know, I can access that myself, you know, whereas rather than judging an action, it's like, I don't know, more kind of the complete picture. But yeah, I know the awakening is a different story altogether.
but it kind of makes sense of that kind of, you know, those impulses to do things that kind of almost brought about my destruction.
Yeah.
I kind of got it. I was like, that's kind of what was driving this, you know. Here I am in this kind of awakening to all of life, but in a death experience that was kind of what I was craving, all, you know.
Yeah.
Half-assed attempts down so many different avenues, drugs, whatever, and now I get it.
Yeah.
Now I get the wisdom in all of my madness as well, you know. Because in order to kind of get life as a whole, to have the experience of now I've truly lived enough that I can die, I needed to have this kind of experience that's, you know, death itself, death of something.
Yeah. Death of that owning of the story, the identity stuff.
Yeah.
It's freeing, and there's no need for that experience, because for me it was like, you know, experiences, trying to accrue all these experiences, and like it was making me more interesting, more this, more that, and that all falls away. It's bullshit. Life's enough. Like simple life is just enough. You're not looking to add anything anymore, and it just, yeah, it seems, you can see the madness in that. It's a kind of search too, isn't it? It's different to the spiritual search in a way, but it's the same, I suppose, the same impulse, but
as much as you can see the madness, you can kind of see the genius in the madness when you, you know, when X is revealed. You know, maybe taboos have kind of warded you off doing all these different things, but yeah, I think a lot of those societal and, you know, religious-based taboos are there to stop us accessing our full potential, or, you know, maybe hacking the system to the point where you don't need those apparatuses.
yeah, that's right. It's the attraction to the edge, isn't it? It's annihilation. It's a desire to kill yourself, get beyond. Because, yeah, it's an odd one, that, even the desire for suicide. It's like, you know, can you really say you want to die, in a sense? Because that's mind shit, you know, you don't really know. And then it is just suffering in a sense, so I don't know.
I think it's quite an interesting point, what you're saying. I think it's like fundamental, but I find it, like you said, the genius, the system, I find it almost a comedy, because, you know, it goes to very, very far terrible things, but it's like everyone is looking their whole life for something. They're doing stuff the whole time. We're doing stuff like, you know, it's obvious when people are on their phone. I'm obviously like this as well. And what are you doing? You're trying to find something. The whole time you're doing stuff, like, and like, why are you doing anything? And if you speak to people about this, they obviously look at you like you're insane, but no one's like, you'll be happy when, right? You'll be happy when you have your family. You'll be happy when you've achieved X, when you've done this. And like you say, that none of those things, what you were looking for was just there. Now how, I mean, there's many ways you can look at that. For me, it's hilarious. But it's like, I just think that's an amazing thing for me.
Is it recent with you then?
I haven't had an awakening.
Oh, you haven't? Okay, so I thought from the way you were speaking, okay.
I just find that point so interesting, that everyone is looking, I would think they call it love, whatever you could think of it as, the love of, that you want to get back from your childhood, but I guess you could say that you probably want before that, or I don't know, you want, like what you say, I can't say because I haven't had that, so, but I just think isn't that what everyone's engaged in their whole life, but then they are closed off to stuff maybe like this or something.
Oh yeah, there's just the restlessness, isn't there? There's this inherent, in everything, there's this trying to escape from just simply being and being still, because it's
trying to escape from what you want, I guess. Well, maybe not, but if what right here is what you want, then isn't that?
But it can't be recognised because the mind is looking, so the mind is looking in time, and time is the thing that has to collapse, and So yeah,
It seems like a good plan if you survive, but I always wonder what if it kills you before it gets to that kind of, you know, it doesn't seem such a good design if all that longing for death or whatever kind of doesn't lead somewhere. Well, if it leads to death, I suppose.
well, but then there's nothing. Yeah, well, you can't say.
Well, yeah, no, I mean, we don't. I don't
Yeah, of course, we don't know. Although some people will say they do know. So
I just think it's so brilliant looking back. People always look back on the excesses and, you know, oh, it was all leading to this. I just think, wonder, you know, my mind always thinks, well, I wonder if, you know, people would have looked back, but they didn't because it killed them, you know.
yeah, true. Yeah, because if there, yeah, and in death, or the point of death, it's probably recognised as well because there's just nothing. You know, that's really is the end as well. But yeah, it's tough. But some people just, I don't know. My own journey was like that. It was just, life has just seemed unlivable to me for a number of years because it is difficult. Like for most people, you know. So it seemed interesting to just to dissolve in an instant and just be. I think it makes it easier in a way to recognise that awakenings happen, but yeah, again, doubts can come up.
I think linked to that, and how instant actually can it be, or we spoke about the fear of death, for example, that may have been like part of like a previous identity, and that may go away as our friend described, like instantly. Or I think certain things may require like a little bit more time, or a little bit more revising, or like more work, more effort. So I'm wondering to what extent, for example, certain fears or certain traumas, like if from your experience or the awakening of others, if like they dissolve like almost instantly, or if there is like requires like further work or further like a little bit more time, more because I feel sometimes it's not necessarily as instant as it seems, or at least from my experience, like certain things they tend to cling a little bit more, and ultimately they go away. So I'm wondering, like, what's from your experience, was it like really instant, or if it does require like a little bit more work actually?
Well, okay, so some of the patterns take a while to unwind or whatever, or may never be seen in fact. But initially, depending on the depth of this, you know, like in my own case, there was so little thought, most of the time there was none at all. So I think in that it's very difficult to see psychological problems or even see how you're relating or how you have been. Like there's something, maybe you're stuck, you know, in a situation, you're maybe in an abusive relationship, maybe, I don't know, you're not happy with your job or what you're doing, all these things, and you just don't, you've no perspective on that because that's all you've known. So I think sometimes either, you know, later on maybe there's energetic experiences which could bring things to light, or else through conversations there's whatever, things can come to light, or else if you've got trauma you might just get emotional flashbacks or PTSD type visual flashbacks, the whole shebang. So they may continue. I mean, there's no guarantee it will reach that date, so that can be confusing as well, because emotional flashbacks are above and beyond like real suffering without cognitive content, so it can obscure the picture of like peace, you know, the constriction may be gone, but there still may be that, and getting a handle on that is quite good to know, to be able to at least name it and know what it is kind of helpful. So I think a lot of like psychoeducation and stuff is very good to kind of know what the hell's going on in your case, because every case is different. You know, and sometimes I think just seeing, like maybe seeing a pattern or can sometimes be enough just for it to drop away, or maybe not, maybe it'll take a while, because in a way, it can be quite helpful to look at the story. You know, the story is important in a sense of if you're wanting to change your life afterwards, maybe after the honeymoon period, because all the information's there. Like it just becomes very, very clear because there's that space to look at it and what you've done, and maybe you just don't have internal resources to meet life, you know, and how do you build those? Because now your motivation's gone, and you know, and there's peace and there's deep peace, but you know, you don't know how the world works or some shit, you know. So yeah, it can manifest in so many different ways. You know, and if you're on the other side, like of the spectrum, or you're abusive, of course, abuse can continue and not be recognised. You know, which in the case of like gurus is kind of a given, you know.
Yeah, I'm thinking about the topic of forgiveness, and I've heard that as, you know, I suppose spiritual students progress and they become more loving and forgiving, and there comes a stage where it seems that's happened to you, where there's like no need for forgiveness because there's just that oneness. So, like for example, if you perceive someone who is like trying to, you know, harm you or hurt you, and you, before you talked about that unconditional love, is that unconditional love there for them? But then you also realise that they, you know, maybe have negative intentions, like.
Well, forgiveness. I mean, there's nothing to forgive in the you know, in the saying of unconditional love. There's nothing to forgive because everything is as it is. You know, it's just arising. So there's an innocence that goes beyond forgiveness in a sense, or not forgiving. But within that, of course, in the story of time, there are relationships and what, you know, and people, whether awake or, you know, parent people, whether awake or not, often forgive all too easily without actually having, you know, got pissed off, you know, or even seen the wrong in what's going on. So again, it just perpetuates this kind of being in the head and not being in the body, not being in touch with the whole emotions, you know, everything that's going on. So I don't know, forgiveness, sometimes there's, I don't know, it's kind of both at the same time here. There's a recognition of certain things that, there's not a clinging on to things, but there's a seeing of things that were wrong and were unfair and fuck off, you know, kind of thing. That, you know, which is alright because it's not kind of held. Where a lot of people, there's a real processing. Before awakening seems to be much more of a process you have to go through to really, really see the injustice, to really accept that and work through that and to grieve that and then to let go. But it's just, you know, culture is just on the side of let go of this, you know. And if you're a people pleaser or whatever, that's all too easy because you'll forgive anything, you know, like there's no, in that, you know, people get confused with that because it's like, you know, unconditional love in that, but it's bullshit, it's not love for the self, I mean the little self, it's not taking care of your own needs and stuff.
I can struggle with dissociation and feeling things.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any tips or advice for, like, if, you know, if a person just, you know, how to maybe connect more to the body?
Well, you can do, yeah, well, connect more with the body. You probably know it all yourself, like body scans or even just, you know, talking more about your experience, you know, which if you can get into the feeling more, you know, emoting is probably better, like maybe getting into actually expressing your emotions. And can you do that, or do you feel and
sometimes?
I mean, it's a very clever way to deal with trauma, dissociation. It's great, you know, sort of objective, holding back. But is it very numb with you? Do you feel numb, or?
Well, I mean, I've been on the path for, I suppose, many years, and it's gotten much better.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that I'm always looking just to let go of the next layer. So overall, it's okay, but I do sense in some situations it does come up.
Okay.
So it doesn't really negatively affect my life, but I do notice it here and there.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, it's quite common. So it's a freeze response to trauma. That so it's you probably tend to withdraw and stuff whenever things go wrong. But yeah, it's just meditation or getting in touch with the feelings of the body, just body scan and talking, just getting talking things through. People, dissociation isn't always pathological either. I mean, out-of-body experience is an extreme example of that, and also, daydreaming's supposed to be good for you too. So a little bit of daydreaming, sort of passive daydreaming, is supposed to be kind of good. So it goes a whole way from, it's not all. We all do it. So people read a book and maybe they don't read a few lines or like what the fuck, where they go, or just often thought. But yeah, it can be really uncomfortable if it's a numbness. If it's really felt like that can be uncomfortable, and then you're not really seeing what's going on around you in the same way. Connecting, but you can, I don't know, maybe.
I have two questions. You don't have to, of course. One is, do you pick up on energy of other people? And two, how did this happen, the experience?
Pick up on the energy of someone else? Like, in what way, you mean?
I don't know, like, just, feel if someone is feeling what they're feeling, or having, when you stand, like on the tube, you can stand near someone and you can feel this either bizarre, sometimes it's just, maybe it's just a projection, I don't know, but...
Well, again, I don't think that's got anything, I don't know, to do with awakening. I'm not, people do it. I don't know, you're talking about the empath thing. Yes, there sometimes seems as if I can feel sadness in someone else. It doesn't seem to belong to me, or, an emotion like that, yeah. I think, there's a picking up on stuff, I think, sometimes, but it's different. Like, I think initially after awakening it seemed like there was that openness where it seemed like everybody was kind of turned inside out, so this kind of natural kind of knowing what was going on, and then that kind of calms down or whatever. But I think in my own journey, getting in touch, because I had my own codependency issues, so getting in touch with that, my own intuition became very attuned quite quickly, where it wasn't because I didn't register anger, so I didn't know when something was unfair. So some of those things can evolve later on as well, so they're not necessarily to do with awakening. And you may, by the sound of it, you're probably very tuned into the emotions of others. I'm guessing, maybe you're not, I don't know, but just to come up with that. But I'm always cautious because you can get it wrong, and but yeah, I think maybe because there's more stillness, whatever, you're picking up more, maybe feeling the emotions of someone else, if you kind of...
Because, yes, it's if everything is one and everyone is the same, like part of everything, that's why I asked that. I thought that maybe, but I never experienced anything of this, so...
Yeah, but the merging isn't necessarily emotional. there is a kind of, absorption is a kind of merging. So if you're sitting with something, there is, there's that sense, there's intimacy with everything, so there's no division, but it's not necessarily accessing the internal world or thoughts, as people claim. But yeah, it's more the love which belongs to no one, just the unconditional love. You know, so I mean, anything can happen afterwards. So some people are more in touch with thought and they're not in touch with feeling at all afterwards either. You know, so that can happen. You know, an awakened narcissist would be in touch with the head and maybe less the heart. There might be unconditional love being seen. Not intuition, sensation, or feeling. So everybody can, you know, that can be recognised, or can be, that's something that in the psychological level there can be growth in that. So before or after, it might be quicker after, you know. But a lot of energetic experiences can give you a lot of information as well, and they can be like fast track therapy too. So, you know.
Did it make you go and, like, do you now have some kind of practice, or you don't feel it? Did it make you sit or meditate? Or?
I meditate. I do meditate. In the last few years I have done, because I know it's good and a healthy thing to do. So there is that. This is a state of meditation anyway. But yeah, so meditation gets you more in touch with feeling. It's more equilibrium in the mind as well, so it's a healthy thing to do. But so I'll just say it's a time out, it's something I do, so whether there's thought there. So it's not about getting rid of thought, because very often it's empty here anyway, or very, you know, because after awakening, either it slows down, thinking slows down, or it can actually stop. Or it's all part of self-care, so relationships, who you're hanging out with, what you're spending your time, you know, there's that goes on, so I'm careful around that, you know. But if the psychology just totally go, I mean, in this, you may not recognise anything, you know, you may not be bothered about anything ever, because it's very sweet, and you could just continue your life the way it is without any desire to change at all, and that can continue for a long time. I think in the first maybe 3 years or something, there's 2-3 years maybe, there's that kind of, it just wouldn't occur to you to question, look, or anything maybe, because it's kind of new, it's kind of, you know, you're not gauging, there's nothing, there has to be some sort of thought or something there for you to even engage with, so there's just the stillness and the, I don't know, it depends how, it gets everybody different, so for me there was quite a long period, I don't know, maybe 2-3 years of really just wanting to sit, and you know, time could dissolve in that, as in there's no awareness at all of it. Like where you can get a sense of maybe an hour or two passed, there'll be times where, you know, it just collapses totally. So, but it is like I said, when people go, tend to disappear. It's relating with what's here rather than engaging with the mind stuff. But it doesn't stop you planning anything. It just takes the sting out of the anxiety around life, because everything's just kind of unfolding, like unaccepted, so there isn't that fear of the next thing in the same way as before.